Hello everyone, and welcome to the Final Fantasy VII RE-CAST. The FF7 RE-CAST is a podcast dedicated to the Final Fantasy VII Remake universe. This show is airing during the lead-up to the release of Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion. In Episode 2 of the podcast, we'll continue recapping the story of the original Crisis Core, released in 2007 for the PlayStation Portable, and theorize how this part of the story may be more fleshed out in Reunion. As we draw closer to the release of Reunion, we'll start diving into our theories of how the story may change, and how those changes may relate to Final Fantasy VII Remake, and subsequently, Rebirth.
What's going on, everyone? It's your boy Ooch.
I'm Sweet Johnny Cage. Hello, everyone.
How we
Welcome
doing?
to Episode 2.
Let's get it. Episode 2 of the RECAST, Final Fantasy VII RECAST. Of course, this is a Final Fantasy VII podcast. If you didn't already pay attention to the intro, I hope you people are not skipping our intros. Okay, these are
Nicely very well made.
Exactly.
Great job, Ryan.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hold on. Do I have a cheer for this? Okay, I do. Anyway, I'll cut it short. So anyway, so where exactly did we leave off? The last time we were talking about Zack falling off into a church in the Sector 5 slums, meeting Aerith. This is like the first official mention that her name is Aerith and not Eris. And then there's a little something else that I'm sure we're going to be getting into, of course, obviously, before this recap. So tell us a little bit more about this Gact situation, Johnny.
Sure. I mean, before we get into that, you sort of like went over it real quick, but the first mention of Aerith's name not being Eris, for those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, when the original Final Fantasy VII was released, this was during a time where you could name your characters in RPGs. You don't really do it so much anymore, especially with voice acting. Everyone has a name, and they stick to that name. But in especially the first 7 Final Fantasy games, they actually did it up until 10, with the exception of Tidus, the main character. You could name him. Anyway, you could name your characters. But when a character first joined your party, it would go to the name the character screen, and they had a name already filled out. So that was like their canon name. Aerith, in the English version, her name was Eris, A-E-R-I-S. And what was interesting is that Advent Children, the movie for Final Fantasy VII, came out before Crisis Core, and her name was never actually said in that movie, at least in the English version. I don't know if it's ever said in the Japanese version. The closest it ever comes is Marlene says, "Is it her?" when it starts raining while Cloud is fighting Sephiroth in that movie, but her name is never said, so this was truly the first time that her name was ever said out loud, and she introduces herself as Aerith. So really interesting little tidbit. I do wonder if they're ever going to mention it, like mention this sort of interesting note in Reunion at all, but we'll see. So yeah, getting into Gact, this is something that we failed to mention last time, but the character of Genesis is modeled after and in Japanese voiced by a musician who goes by the name Gact, G-A-C-K-T. And before we were recording this episode, before we just started recording, I mentioned to Ryan, like, yo, did you hear about this like Gact weirdness with the contract and how that was like a rumor as to why the remake was being delayed? And he said, wait, who? And Ryan, you can pick it up from here.
Okay, so essentially, and then for, obviously full transparency, this might be the first time you're tuning in. Obviously, welcome. But if you missed out on episode 1, please go and watch that again, because I am fully honest, I actually never played the original Crisis Core. I'm actually rewatching a lot of the cutscenes and whatnot to get caught up to speed with what I'm going to be expecting for Reunion. But because of that, I had no prior knowledge to this whole Gact situation with Genesis. And so the funny thing is, as I'm watching, this playthrough of these cutscenes, and I see Gact, or I see I'm already calling him Gact, right? His name is Genesis, right? So I see Genesis, and I'm just like, why does this guy look vaguely familiar? And I'm not even talking about, like, I maybe have seen him in like a commercial or something for like this game or whatever. Like, Like, no, aside from that, like, I feel like I've seen this person individually somewhere before. And then Johnny tells me, oh yeah, like, this dude's like voiced by Gact. And I'm just like, there it is. It makes perfect sense. So Gact is like it was like Gact. So I don't even know if they were a band or just one person.
I think his name is Gact, but he's been in bands.
Okay, so I remember that seeing that name floating around the J-Rock space back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, like definitely the mid 2000s, like with a bunch of other bands like Garugamesh, 1212, Deering Gray, and Gact, right? Like those were some familiar names that I was obviously familiar with. And so I'm just like, that's crazy that he is actually like modeled and voicing the character for Genesis. So that's pretty sick. But the other weird part was that's not even the weird part. The weird part is what? That he's reprising the role. Do you want to get into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I really wish we covered this in the first episode, but I kind of just didn't put a lot of thought into it until this week. But so yeah, Gact was he lent his likeness to the character and voiced the character in the Japanese version of the game. And there was a rumor for a really long time that one of the main reasons that Crisis Core was forever stuck on PSP was because there was like a contract issue with Gact, and so they couldn't like reuse his likeness and update it, let alone the voice lines. Like they just wouldn't allow it. So when Reunion was announced earlier this year, Nomura and Katase did a bunch of interviews, and they said like, no, that was just a rumor. I mean, this is what they're saying, but they just said it was a rumor, and like that was not the case. We weren't thinking about redoing Crisis Core until we started on the remake project. So it was never really that. But the interesting thing is that the game was announced to have a completely new voice cast. I don't personally like that too much when it comes to the voice of Zack specifically. I really liked his voice actor from Advent Children. I thought it sounded different in Remake. I think it's the same voice actor from Crisis Core PSP and Advent Children. I think that's the same person, but in Remake, it's a different person, and I think that person is now doing Crisis Core Reunion. Anyway, they said it's an all-new voice cast. And then they also said that Gact's lines did not need to be re-recorded. So I was curious, like, does that mean that they're using the original voice recording from the PSP and maybe just using some like AI upsampling to like make it sound a bit more clear?
Yeah.
Are they restoring it? What are they doing? And then I come to find out, if you go to the Japanese website for Crisis Core Reunion, it says voiced by Gact for Genesis. So it's unclear if he's coming back, re-recording everything, or if they really are just reusing everything from PSP. And maybe there's like a contract that Genesis can't be portrayed by anybody else. I don't know. But it's a really weird, interesting situation, and the reporting on it is a little confusing. So check that out. Look into it for yourself. But the articles kind of go in circles, and there's not a lot of citation, which is weird. But yeah, it's an interesting situation nonetheless. And admittedly, it's one that I completely forgot about until this week when I remembered who Gact was and like the whole like reason that was important to Crisis Core, and I just completely forgot. So I wonder if they'll ever reference it, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, so that is really interesting, and I figured with a lot of things that come from like Japanese news sources and whatnot, a lot of things can get lost in translation.
Sure.
So my thing was, well, maybe the article was meant to report that Gact could be reprising, or it is still Gact out of all of the, because that, like you said, everyone else on the cast is not reprising. Like they're getting new voice actors or whatever, and it's just that Gact is the exception. To what you said, like maybe there is a clause that no one else can be Genesis in this respect. So kind of cool. And it would be interesting if they really didn't have to re-record any of the lines that Genesis had in Crisis Core into Reunion, and they were able to upsample it, as you said. That'd be actually really interesting, because that was gonna be one of my first concerns. I was like, dude, how's that gonna sound? Like, because some of the audio for a lot of these older games are kind of rough in comparison to like what we have nowadays. So definitely.
Dude, oh my god, I'm on this IMDb page right now. I'm so sorry. Did you ever watch Band of Brothers?
No.
The voice actor for Zack in Crisis Core Advent Children, for those first two, is George Luz from Band of Brothers. This dude is like a really good actor. I did not know that was him. That's fucking crazy. Anyway, shout out to Band of Brothers. But yes, he is no longer the voice of Zack.
Yeah, much like a lot of the other characters, obviously, that are or have been within this remake universe that we have been diving ourselves into. So, without further ado, Johnny, take it away with this recap of what we the story of the original Crisis Core.
Yeah. So Caleb Pierce is the new person. He is the voice in Remake, and then I'm just double checking. He's also in First Soldier. Crisis Core Reunion hasn't been put on IMDb yet, but I do believe it's the same person. Anyway, I gotta know Caleb Pierce.
You're gonna look up his other projects.
I have to know. Yeah, it is. Okay, cool. So yeah, on to the recap. So where we left off before, in the last episode of Dragon Ball Z, we mentioned that Zack was chasing after Angeal in the Sector 5 reactor. After chasing after Hollander alongside Sephiroth, Zack confronts Angeal. Angeal attempts to fight Zack. Zack will not fight him. And so Angeal breaks the ground underneath Zack. He falls through the reactor, or the structures around the reactor, and crashes into the Sector 5 slums in the church. Zack has sort of like a dream of where he hears his mother's voice, which Cloud does the same exact thing in Final Fantasy VII. So that's like an interesting little connection between the two. And he wakes up to Aerith. And so Zack has officially met Aerith. And now in Crisis Core, we get to kind of see the beginning of their relationship. Aerith, of course, is asking for a bodyguard or a protector. And that's just sort of like her cheeky way of getting them to date. And this is personally where I feel like the game kind of drags. This is a huge chunk of the game that takes several hours to complete. And you're literally just doing little fetch quests around the Sector 5 slums, helping out the citizens, which is fine. But for something as important to the overall story as Zack and Aerith's relationship, I felt like this was kind of forcing the idea a little bit. Like I said before, Crisis Core is... The idea of Crisis Core was spawned off of a secret cutscene in Final Fantasy VII. You do rebuild Cloud's memories in 7, and that's where you really understand who Zack is, but the whole Nibelheim incident, the whole thing, seeing that from Zack's perspective, seeing it how it really happened, and learning about Zack, and understanding that he had a relationship with Aerith before Cloud, it's a little thin. And so you would really hope that they could make a genuine romance happen. But to me, this is just boring. It's very boring, and it seems like a very hokey kind of relationship, not one as serious as 7 made it seem. So I'm really hoping in Reunion, I doubt this section is going to change a ton, but I really hope that maybe they add some more conversational dialogue, they get to know each other a bit better than this led on. But yeah, so basically you go around the Sector 5 slums, doing fetch quests. A kid steals somebody's wallet, you try to get it back, and then you learn that the kid is super poor or something, so Aerith wants to let him go. I think it's a little weird. One thing that I am curious about, though, is, Ryan, if you remember in 7 Remake, the Sector 5 slums is a really big side quest hub. There's a lot of side quests during the Sector 5 sections, specifically in the kids' clubhouse area, where it's the kids' training ground, and you do the Whack-A-Box challenge for the first time. You collect the Moogle coins. I'm wondering if in Reunion we get to see those kids, maybe a different generation of kids, because I think Crisis Core is 7 years before the events of 7. Like, I wonder if that's going to be shown in Reunion. Like, I was wondering if what your thoughts on that were.
I honestly, I think that would be really cool because I enjoyed all of that in
Me too.
Remake. It was a lot of fun, and I literally thought to myself, if they had these as like multiplayer mini games with like a leaderboard, like that would be super sweet. Like I think that would be really fun to enjoy, and it just adds more to the game, overall, because these types of games are clearly like action adventure RPGs with a lot of action and whatnot, great story, great music, great characters and all that. But if you really love the world that you're immersing yourself in, sometimes it's really cool to like take a break from the main stuff and to like enjoy whatever like this side stuff or whatever it is. But as far as like it being like a previous generation, like I thought to myself like, well, it would be cool if like, it would be really funny if like, say it was the same kids but they were like babies or like toddlers. I don't really know how that would work out. But like, I don't even think the kids that were in the remake were even like old enough. Like they're probably like right around that age where like if they were to be existent in Reunion, they would probably be babies, maybe just barely walking if anything, so it probably wouldn't work out. So it would probably have to be a separate generation of kids. So yeah.
So I am wondering too, so there's 2 characters specifically that have a pretty big function in Sector 5 in 7 Remake. That's Mirelle, Mireille. Muriel, maybe, is how you pronounce it. I can't remember how they pronounce it, but it's the old woman who's like a treasure hunter. You do some quests for her in 7 Remake. And then there's also Kairi, who everyone thought was Yuffie for some reason. She's like a thief in Sector 5 during the side quests.
Yeah. I kind of remember that a little bit. Yeah.
So, like, I'm wondering if maybe they will appear at the very least, either just as like townspeople or something. Could be. I don't know. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, so after you do all that, onward with the recap, after you hang out with Aerith for a while, you give her the idea of selling flowers, which we know is what she does in 7, so that's where she gets the idea from. Zack gets a phone call. They call him on the cell phone, and it's Shinra calling, telling him that Genesis has shown up and is attacking Shinra HQ, so Zack needs to leave Aerith and report back to work. So while battling through Shinra HQ, technically on the highway, Angeal shows up and sort of tells Zack, like, hey, I'm technically on your side now. This is the side I've chosen. I don't really know what Genesis is up to. Haven't figured that out yet. And I'm still technically a soldier, so, this is the honorable thing to do, I think. So Genesis brings him to HQ. While in HQ, he's told to go find Hojo, who I think this is his first appearance in the game. He may have appeared quickly early on, but this is when we actually talk to him. Now, this is where we get our first real mention of Jenova. We learned about it from the project files in Hollander's lab in the Sector 5 reactor. That's when we learned about like Project G and Project S, I think. But this is where Hojo specifically says, Jenova, the calamity that fell from the sky. And that's what Jenova is always referred to in 7, and so this is really the first prequel mention of Jenova. He somehow tricks Zack to enter a test chamber, traps him in there like a dummy, and then he asks, like, who do you identify more with, Angeal or Genesis? And depending on your answer, you get a different buff. It's kind of dumb, but little Easter egg. The test chamber appears to be the same one in the same room as the one in 7, where you meet Red 13 and rescue Aerith. So it's the same thing. They even have like the little gate going across the elevator in the distance in the room. So it's definitely the same room. But yeah, just a little Easter egg. So I think in terms of changes here, I think Hojo can be explored a bit more in Reunion. We didn't get a ton of him in Remake, and like that makes sense. You really don't get much of him in the original 7 either at this point. But I do think that this is an opportunity to kind of flesh him out a little bit more, maybe with some more voice lines. Maybe you can read his research now or something like that. But also, he's not terribly far removed from Professor Gast, who you don't know about yet. At this stage, like, it's still 7 years prior to the events of 7. So there's still a lot that he's still learning as a scientist, and like his experiments haven't advanced that far. But yeah, so who knows? So a couple minutes later, Genesis shows up, attempts to kidnap Hojo. Angeal shows up to defend, and then he chases Genesis out. And then Zack and Angeal chase after him, and then Genesis summons Bahamut. And you see Bahamut in a trailer for Reunion, so this is when it happens. And the summons in the game always happen with Genesis, more or less. Like, Genesis summons a monster to escape, and then you got to fight it, and then you get the summon. Like, that's kind of how it works.
It's pretty neat. I like that.
Yeah, it's cool. It contextualizes things. It's not just like a piece of material you find, and oh my god, here's this fucking god coming out of hell. Like,
yeah,
there's a little bit more to it than that. It's a bit more similar to like 10. Like, it's an actual summoning happening. Yeah. So after you defeat Bahamut, some time goes by, and then Zack gets called on a mission alongside Sung of the Turks. This is where they really meet. Actually, no, they met when they go to Benora, but now they're like together again, getting to know each other a bit more. And the mission is to a mountain area called Modeoheim. And they're going there to look for Genesis. This is the only time that Modeoheim is mentioned. This is like sort of like Benora in that it really only exists in the world of Crisis Core. So hopefully in Rebirth, as we get to explore the open world, hopefully, of 7 Remake in Rebirth, we hear about Modeoheim or we hear about Benora. Hopefully. But the most important part of this is that this is where we meet Cloud. So
yes,
we're basically, we're halfway through the game at this point, and Cloud is just now showing up. And so we see him as he really is, just a grunt soldier, not part of like the soldier organization, just a Shinra grunt. And the reason they even meet is because Sung says that Zack is like a backwoods boy and like grew up in the rough, or, you know, roughing it in the tall grass or whatever. And then Cloud chimes in saying, hey, so was I. I'm from this like podunk town called Nibelheim. Takes off his helmet, and it's Cloud.
Nice little reveal. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciated it. It was nice. And like, you're sort of waiting for it the entire time you're playing Crisis Core. And then it's halfway through the game and he finally shows up. Like, they really let Zack breathe. Like, it really is Zack's game. It's not Cloud's game at all. Cloud is just a supporting character. And I think that's really cool. Yeah. Sorry. I'm not sure if you had something to say.
Oh, yeah. No, there was actually one thing I did want to bring into this at this point, right? So I'm glad that you said that you said it like that, where it's like, this is truly like Zack's game. It's not, you know, it's not another Cloud game, right? And because of that, like, even just watching all the cutscenes and like some of the little action that they do keep in this playthrough, like, I do get to see some of the actual like combat and whatnot, but they make it very short and sweet. It's like you get the first few hits and then they get like the last portion of the fight and just to save time. And so I think it's really cool to even like realize that when you think of it in perspective, like, realistically, this whole story, protagonist wise, it starts with Zack, right? Like, Zack is the first dude, like the first soldier. Oh, right? Like, he's in there.
Not really, but yeah.
I know, not really. You get my joke, right? But
yeah.
You know, like, I thought that was really cool. And
that
like,
game is shutting down, by the way. I don't know if you heard about that.
Right. You know, but yeah, but it's really cool to see. And then like, it's also like, it's nice to see how like, and I think you're gonna get to this part where they actually, are you gonna get to this part? I'm like looking at you know what, let me not say it. It'll probably be for episode 3, but you know, something happens later, which, you know, tune into episode 3 for that one. So just take it away before I spoil it by accident.
Okay. I mean, the game is 20 years old. There's no real spoilers.
Yeah,
15 years old. But yeah, so it's the reveal of Cloud. And he is just this like sheepish kind of young man who, we don't know his motivations from 7. We don't know about the promise he made to Tifa of becoming a soldier. Like, we don't know that he feels like a failure at this point. We don't know that he's hiding at this point. Like, hiding from, the expectations that he set for himself and told everyone about. So, Zack and Cloud kind of become buddies, and, it's clear that Zack kind of cares about the people around him, and that sets him apart from Angeal and Sephiroth and Genesis as far as soldiers go. Like, it makes him different, which is nice to see. The only reason we kind of get this scene is because their helicopter crashes. Like, everyone makes it out alive, but the helicopter crashes in the mountains, and now they've got to walk. So, like, that's the whole genesis of the scene, if you will.
Yeah.
I can make puns too. So,
Hey.
As the group splits up to explore Modeoheim, it's evident that Genesis is here. There's a lot of Genesis copy soldiers, and eventually Zack finds Genesis threatening to kill Hollander, as Hollander has been unable to do anything about the degradation that's happening to Genesis. Zack stops Genesis, knocks his sword away, and then he tells Cloud to run after Hollander. After this, Genesis escapes, and on the way to find Cloud and Sung, Zack encounters a monster that bears the face in a way. It's kind of hard to explain. It's almost like a relief in its neck of, or on its body of Angeal. So it's kind of got Angeal's face like on its body somehow. This confuses Zack. Zack defeats the monster, moves on, and he finds Cloud and Sung, who are kind of like knocked out or wounded, not dead or anything. But it seems like they've been knocked out by Angeal, because this is right after he fights the Angeal monster. Sung tells Zack to go after Angeal, since he's with Hollander, and then, Zack runs along, and Angeal attempts to get Zack to fight him. Zack parries, some hits, says, "I'm not going to fight you," very Luke Skywalker, and then Hollander shows up. Now, this is where you get a bit of an exposition and like a lore dump. So Hollander reveals that Project G, which we learned about from his files back in the Sector 5 reactor, he reveals that Project G was not named after Genesis like previously thought, but Jillian, who was Angeal's mother from the beginning of the game. The experiment started with implanting Genova cells into Jillian. Then, when Genesis was in the fetal state of his own mother's womb, Jillian's genes were mapped onto him. It was deemed a failure because the end result didn't really happen. But Angeal was born naturally from Jillian after she was implanted with Genova cells, and is deemed by Hollander to be the, quote, perfect creation. Angeal then reveals that yes, he is the perfect monster, and that his cells can absorb the traits of others and pass them on to others. Hollander then says this is exactly like Genova, which is why Angeal is considered perfect. So I kind of want to talk about this for a minute, because I feel like this really just gets like glanced over in 2 minutes, even though this is like a huge thing. So
That is pretty huge.
As we know Genova from Final Fantasy VII, and even 7 Remake up until this point, it's just a monster. Like, it's the calamity that fell from the sky. It's this thing that crash landed onto the planet, and like the ancients had to basically sacrifice most of themselves to defeat and to seal, and to like seal into the strata of the earth, I think is what they say in 7. And so she's like buried in this rock, and then Shinra discovers her. Like, we don't really get an idea of what the problem was. Like, it's a monster, okay, we fight the monster, we seal the monster, but we never understand what it really is. And so Hollander's saying that it can absorb traits from one thing, pass it on to another, is like kind of insane. Like, that's a really big problem for a monster to have and for somebody to deal with. And so we kind of get an idea, or we can kind of theorize like what that might have looked like in the eyes of the ancients, and what they may have had to do to kill her, or to seal her at the very least. And so I do hope that in 7 Remake, we learn a bit more about this, because it seems like Hollander, like, we know that Shinra was using Genova to experiment for a long time, but we don't really know when that started, or who was involved in the very beginning. And like we learn in 7 about Lucrezia and Vincent and Sephiroth, like we learn about all that. But this is really the first time that we learn what Jenova is and what they were trying to do with her, or it. So yeah, just really interesting. Yeah, not sure if you had any thoughts or questions or anything, Ryan.
So the one thing I will bring up is that you're totally right, because like I said, like I've been watching this, watching the cutscenes and whatnot, and they definitely glanced over that, because that is huge. Like, Jenova has been this whole mystery, as you're putting it. Like they found, like, she was a calamity from the sky, and they found her, and they're just trying to figure out like what's up, and then here is Angeal, and Angeal's basically like a copy of her in a sense, because he has the same abilities as what Jenova, the original, was able to pull off. So I think that's ridiculous, and it's even more ridiculous as to what happens after.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering if the fiends or all the monsters in this world are from Jenova.
Right. You have to wonder,
Maybe,
because we don't even know.
I don't know. Yeah, so anyway, Angeal, after all this, Angeal gets pissed at Hollander, summons some monsters, and Zack thinks they're coming to attack him or Hollander, attempts to defend, but then all the monsters run past him and start attacking Angeal instead. And then Angeal transforms into an even bigger monster that sort of looks like Ultima Weapon from, I think 10 has a very similar design, where it's like almost like a centaur looking thing, like 4 legs with a torso and arms, and it's all silver and white, and it's got a trident. And Angeal attempts to hit Zack with a trident. Zack sort of moves away, but it cuts his face, and then that's where he gets his facial scar from that you see in like all the promotional materials. It comes from Angeal, his former master, or his former teacher.
Oh.
So, yeah, very, very poetic.
Yes.
So, big boss fight happens. Zack defeats Angeal, and then Angeal transforms back into his human form, and he's clearly degraded now, like he's got the same problem that Genesis had. Or maybe it's just because he's defeated, but he's all gray and withered. And he gives Zack the Buster Sword, which we know is a family heirloom from Angeal's family. And so now it belongs to Zack. And he tells Zack, follow your dreams, protect your honor as soldier. And like, this is... Oh my God, Ryan, you have no fucking idea how powerful of a line that is. And when you see the end of this game, I hope you feel the same way I do. Anyway, so Zack, it then flashes to Zack back in the Sector 5 church with Aerith. She's like picking flowers, but Zack is in the corner grieving Angeal because he just killed who was, by all accounts, his best friend, his mentor, his teacher. He had to put him down. And Zack, at this point, is clearly questioning a lot, like, what the hell is Shinra doing? What is my job as soldier? Why is everything falling apart? And, like, why is Shinra not really talking about this? Like, why is there no debrief? Like, you can kind of infer that these are the thoughts in his head.
Right.
So then, fade to black, and then it fades up, and Zack is now talking to a group of soldier recruits, maybe like 3rd class or 4th class. They still wear their helmets. And he's got the Buster Sword, but now he's got new hair. And there's like an internal dialogue that Zack has with himself where he says, like, it's been a while since the Modeoheim incident. And according to like posts online, most people think that this is like a 1 or 2 year time skip. It clearly some time has passed, that is known, but exactly how much is unclear. But during this internal monologue, Zack says that after apprehending Hollander, turning him over to Shinra, the company appears to be in a bit of a mess. The director of Soldier has gone missing, Lazard. He's nowhere to be found. The Turks are always following Zack now. Like, Zack goes on vacation, and then the Turks say, like, oh, our vacation time aligns. Like, it's PTO that you can just request from a boss. Like,
right.
That ain't happening. But no one, the important thing is that no one ever mentions Angeal or Genesis, like it never happened. And so you kind of get the sense, again, of what the Turks can really do. They can make it so things just to get swept under the rug. That's what they do. They're the cleanup.
They're the cleanup crew. Yep.
Yeah. So then we see a beach vacation with Zack and Cisne, and we'll stop the recap here for now because we get a bit of more of a lore dump after that, and then it starts progressing into what everyone hopes this game is, and that is the Nibelheim mission.
Yes.
So we'll pick up the recap next time with this beach vacation and the Nibelheim mission.
Sounds good. So, yeah, I mean, I guess just closing thoughts. This is actually where, and, you know, admittedly, I actually did watch a little bit past where Johnny told me to stop, so that's my fault. But, so, like, for episode 3, I can definitely say that this is really when things, for the story at least, start to get, you know, picked up a little bit more. More things become interesting. Not to say that everything we haven't already seen it, you know, it was not interesting, but it definitely is. But, like, you know, Sephiroth, Cloud, Zack, some conversations. Oh, it's great. I can't wait to talk about it in the next one. But the one thing, I don't know if you mentioned this when you brought up how, you know, Zack is now, like, this was like a, you know, maybe a few years after or so, the speculation.
Yeah, like 1 or 2 years.
Yeah. Is that he's now Soldier First Class, which is
officially, yeah.
Yeah, which is pretty
like gets
cool.
The whole promotion.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it happens technically like I know Angeal says that he's recommending him for First Class when they go on the mission, I think to Wutai, like right in the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
Like I remember he mentions it, but I think at this point it's because he's like talking to the recruiting class, like it's 100% official at this point. His outfit changes a little bit too. But yeah, if you think about it, like Angeal's dead, Genesis still MIA. Now it's just him and Sephiroth. Like they are the only 2 Soldier First Classes left.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like I think what you're alluding to is like the pieces are on the board now. Like,
yes, sir.
Zack is who Zack is the person that we know him from the end of 7. Sephiroth is about to go into the place where he learns about himself and kind of goes nuts. Like the Nibelheim incident is imminent, and Cloud is just still a grunt Shinra soldier. You know, he's just an infantryman still, and they're about to go to Nibelheim where it all goes down. So I had a feeling that this episode of our podcast would kind of be the weakest one. Like there's not a lot to really explore here. Like I said, it'd be cool if they fleshed out Sector 5 a bit more. It'd be really nice if maybe they approached the Zack and Aerith relationship a bit better, I think, because just doing like little fetch quests just feels lame. Like,
yeah,
it really feels like the way Aerith and Zack's relationship was referred to in the original 7, it seemed to be a lot more serious. And by the end of the game, you do feel it. Like by the end of Crisis Core, you definitely feel it. Jesus, it's so tough. It goes so hard. But like, yeah, it just feels like, it feels a little forced. It feels like Square was like, okay, like we have to put them in a relationship. We know where it ends, but they didn't really know how to start it. So I hope they change it up a bit. If they don't, it's whatever. You know, Aerith will appear a couple more times in the game with Zack. Like they do hang out a few more times before Zack goes to Nibelheim, and that kind of like helps establish it a bit more, but it's still tough. But yeah, like I said, I felt like this episode of our podcast would be kind of like the weakest of the 4, just because this section, like Modeoheim, is super important, but the stuff before that is filler. Like they're trying to do important things, but kind of dropping the ball a little bit, in my opinion. But yeah, next episode is really where it ramps up. So I'm very excited for that. Just trying to think if there's anything that we didn't cover. Maybe, yeah, Hojo, Cloud, Hollander, the Genova thing. Yeah, I guess that's it. Do you have any... Let me try to think of a question for you to leave off from.
Okay.
Since you haven't played 7,
fully.
Like, so you got to the point where Aerith is about to die.
Right.
Unfortunately. Yeah, you're about to go to Temple of the Ancients. Yeah. That's where you're at in 7. Oh, leading into the next one. So you've done Nibelheim. You've done the flashback. You have met Sephiroth in Nibelheim proper. You've seen that the city is rebuilt, or the town is completely rebuilt like nothing ever happened. Did you rescue Vincent?
Vincent was early, I feel like. Wasn't he not?
No, Yuffie you get really early. Vincent you get when you go to Nibelheim, before you get Cid.
I'm pretty sure I have him. Yeah.
Okay. You get him out of the coffin, and then...
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember that, yeah.
Very weird.
Yeah, he was just chilling in there, like...
Yeah. Trying to think if I have, like, a question to leave off on to see where your theories can go.
Yeah, just keep in mind, because, like, I did see a little bit further into
Sure.
episode 3, so...
Okay, I really don't think I have a question for you this time.
That's fine.
Let me ask your opinion.
Okay.
Knowing like that the Zack and Aerith relationship is important. What is your feeling on how it's been developed so far in Crisis Core?
So far I feel like it's kind of light. You know, like it's nothing it's nothing like crazy. I feel like the biggest point in their relationship has been the part where he goes to see her one last time to tell her that, hey, I'm going to be gone for a while. And then she's like, oh, well, can I call you? And he's like, well, yeah, of course. And I feel like this is kind of alluding to that could be their last encounter because of what may happen. Because, I mean, obviously, like we know, the end result of this game is Zack is like no more. So like this would kind of be like one of those parts in a story where it's like, yeah, you know, like, oh, of course I'll be back. Like, I'm a hero, you know, type stuff. And then, you know, then he doesn't. That's like the biggest prediction I guess I could have, in addition to like where their relationship was kind of really, I guess you could say solidified, because like they clearly care about each other. And even during all of the fluffy stuff where it was like the filler of the game, quote unquote, where you're just like, you know, like doing a bunch of hunts and stuff for items, and just, you know, you're building the wagon for the flowers and whatnot. During that point, I mean, it was, you spend hours on it when you actually play the game, probably to give the player that sense that, Jesus, they're spending so much time together.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, they're really taking all this time to bond and like to go through it, even if it's all within like a day or something. And, you know, I guess realistically, it doesn't take all that much time to, I guess, fall for somebody. And so they got so used to each other in that respect that they now obviously have formulated feelings for one another, which I think will obviously play into what, you know, inevitably happens after or next. So that's
okay.
Kind of where my thoughts are at with that.
Gotcha. So more or less the same page, but yeah, good points. All right. Well, I guess that'll do it for us for episode 2. A lot to recap, a couple of info dumps, but mostly just kind of getting to the point where we want to be in this story. So in part 3, we'll pick it up with the beach vacation with Zack and Cisne and the Turks. And then we'll spend some more time with Zack and Aerith together, building that wagon you were referring to, selling some flowers. And then Zack, Sephiroth, and Cloud will set off for Nibelheim. And we'll pick it up there. All right. Well, I have been Sweet Johnny Cage. This has been
your boy Uch.
Thank you so much for joining us for the Final Fantasy VII Recast. We will see you next week with episode 3. Have a good one.